So every trucking channel out there has its own how I got into trucking story. This channel's not going to be any different. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that story today. Now, I tried to tell this story once before, but I dipped my toes into politics and I got a little passionate. And it started to sound a little less YouTube and a little more 4chan for a little bit. So we're just going to try this one again, and hopefully this time I don't come off quite so unhinged. Let's just suffice it to say that I try and live my life according to the golden rule. You know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or on the flip side of that, don't do to others what you wouldn't want them to do to you. I do my best to live according to that philosophy. You know, I don't hate people as a group because of things that they can't control. I try and be respectful of others and their beliefs. I don't like it when people tell me what I can and can't do, so I do my best to keep out of things, to leave well enough alone, and not try and tell others what they can and can't do. So that kind of informs my political beliefs, and my political beliefs inform my actions to a great degree. And so, and that kind of leads into why I'm in trucking. But I'll get into that a little bit later. In order for this story to work, you need to know a little bit more about my background. So it actually goes back, I mean, this story goes back before I even was born. My dad was in the Navy. He was career Navy. He was a pilot. And that meant he was deployed a lot out on ships and spent a lot of time out at sea. It also meant that growing up, we moved around a lot. Because we moved around a lot, I never really set down roots. I don't really have what I would consider a hometown. I mean, not in the traditional sense of the word. I have a couple of places I consider home, simply because I've lived there for large stretches of time, or I have family that's from there, or, you know, it's someplace that, even though I didn't spend a lot of my childhood there, I always considered it to be my hometown, even though I wasn't even born there. I was born in California, and then a couple of months after that, we moved to Virginia Beach. A couple of years later, we moved to South Carolina. A couple of years after that, we moved to Philadelphia. We weren't there for very long, as I recall, and we moved to Washington State. And then we actually even spent a couple of years in Japan before moving back to Virginia Beach, which is where I went to high school. After high school, I went to college in North Carolina. I think I've mentioned North Carolina once or twice before, but the Appalachian Mountains are one of the most beautiful parts of the country, I think, and I spent a fair amount of time wandering around the Appalachians while I was in college. Of course, after I got done with college, I didn't finish college, but I was done with college. I moved down and met up with my folks who had, during that time, moved to Ohio and then later to Atlanta. Now, Atlanta is one of the places I kind of consider a hometown, simply because both my parents went to high school there. They both met in Atlanta. my father's side, most of his sisters lived in Atlanta for most of my life. Well, both of his sisters lived in Atlanta for most of my life. And when they moved back to Atlanta, and I followed them not long after, that's really the closest thing I can consider to a hometown. Growing up as a kid, that was always what I considered a hometown, even though I had never lived there. But a couple years after moving to Atlanta, I decided to, and I'll get to the reasons in a little bit, but I decided to move down to Panama. Not Panama City, Florida, but the real Panama, the one with the canal. And I spent, well, the better part of 20 years moving back and forth between Panama and the U.S. Spent a little bit of time in Colombia, but Panama is really the closest thing I have to a hometown, a real hometown, because I've spent more time in Panama, I think, than anywhere else. All my friends live there. I met my ex-wife there. My kids grew up there for the most part. They're both up in the States now, but they're both older now, and one's about to graduate from college, the other one's just started college, so they're out of the house, and I'm no longer attached to their mother. So I have a great deal of freedom afforded to me again, and I like to take advantage of that and move around a lot, get around a lot. That's one of the things that speaks to me about trucking, is just being out on the open road. I really love to be out on the open road. But let's go back a ways before and talk a little bit about my career choices. So, I've always been a computer geek. I am still a computer geek. We got our first PC when I was 5 years old, back in like 1980. It was an Apple II, and I just really got into it. And so since then, I have always been a passionate hobbyist, computer hobbyist, but for a long time I also chose to work in the industry. I worked IT for a long time, but I never really liked it. I mean, there were aspects of it that I really enjoyed. Playing with the tech was always fun, but you know, after a while, it got kind of old. But somewhere around 2000 or so is when I figured out I could make a whole lot more money as an independent contractor. So I got myself fired from my last real IT job, W-2 job. I wasn't laid off. I got myself fired. But it was pretty much because I told my boss that I knew what I was doing. I didn't like being micromanaged, and I could make twice as much money elsewhere. And I was kind of blunt about it. I was still young. I was only 25, I think, at the time. So he didn't take that too well, and I wasn't there but maybe a couple more days after that. But I was right. It didn't take me a week, and I was making twice as much money as an independent contractor somewhere else at a larger company. I got to the point where I was making so much money. In fact, that's actually what led me to Panama. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Panama was, as they call it, a tax haven country. It still kind of sort of is, but believe me, as somebody that's lived there for 20 years, it's not ideal anymore. So, you know, if you've got a mindset to move your money out of the country, that's not really the best place to take it. But I did. But at the time it was, and at the time I did. And in doing so, I had to visit Panama multiple times. And as a single bachelor making probably more in a month than most Panamanians make in a year, I was fairly popular, if you know what I mean. And so I enjoyed my time in Panama, so much so that after about the third visit, I decided I was just going to stay there. And I became probably, I mean, there were remote workers, but I was a remote worker in the IT field long before it became the thing to do. I mean, it is now because of the pandemic, but back then it was pretty rare to be a completely remote worker, especially living out of the country and working over the internet. I mean, this was back before we really had voice over IP, back before we had video over IP. I mean, there was definitely no video over IP, or video conferencing as we call it these days, or video calls or any of that. So the technology was still pretty new back then and was still pretty crude when it came to remote working. But I was able to do it. I was able to pull it off. I was smart enough and I knew enough about the systems and about networking that I could pull it off. And so I convinced my customers, my customer, because at the time I was a full-time independent contractor, but I was full-time on with a single customer. And I convinced them to let me move down to Panama and continue to work from down there, which I did. Let's fast forward a few years because it's not really relevant to my trucking story, but essentially I have adopted the philosophy of being unemployable. I don't know if it's a philosophy, it's a lifestyle of being unemployable. I do not like working for somebody. I don't like sitting in an office and just pushing a pencil or pressing buttons on a keyboard. And over time, that led me to become a little more entrepreneurial. I started taking the money I was making and putting it into different ideas and different projects. And every once in a while, one of them would work out, but most of the time they didn't. But I've always kind of spent my money on whatever money I make on new ideas. I got into crypto for a little while. I'm still in it. We don't have to talk too much about crypto, but let's just say I've got a crypto business. It's based in Panama. It sustains itself, but it doesn't sustain me. Well, in about 2019, I came back up to the States for the holidays. And while I was here, some family drama happened, as it tends to do. And it became clear to me that I could not go back to Panama, at least for a while. So, although I had my crypto business down there, and all of my friends lived down there, and one of my daughters lived down there still, I couldn't go back. And I had to find something else to do. Well, crypto in the U.S. is a little more complicated than it is down in Panama. It's a little harder to get into, and it's a lot more regulated. doing what I do and what I have made a business of in Panama, up here, it just wasn't realistic. So I had to find something else, and of course, 2019 was also not a great time for crypto. The market was kind of in the tank. So I wanted to look for something that I could do that just was not crypto related, and I really didn't want to get back into IT. I was kind of burned out on the whole technology thing. So I looked around, and at the time, the freight market was pretty good. The trucking industry was going pretty good. When I was a kid, back in the 80s, when we had Dukes of Hazzards and Knight Rider and all those shows, I had thought that being a truck driver looked like a pretty cool thing to do. And so when I started looking for stuff to do, I wanted something that would get me out of the house, something that would allow me to continue to roam freely, something I could build a business out of, because I still don't like working for other people, and something that was not tech or crypto. I'm sure there's other stuff out there, but I latched onto trucking, and that's the beginning of my trucking story. I went out and got my CDL. I was a one and doneer. I got through it. I never had to retake any tests, including the driving exam. I didn't really have any issues getting through CDL school. I enjoyed it. And shortly thereafter, after I got my CDL, I was able to get a job at Covenant. Now, I'm going to have a few stories probably to tell from my time at Covenant. I wasn't there very long, because it became very clear to me very quickly that I was not set up. I am not of the correct personality type for team driving. It isn't for me. Basically, the short and sweet of it is that I never found a co-driver. I guess I found one guy that I worked with pretty well. And of course, my trainer I had a good trainer. I may have some stories from those days, but I had a good trainer. One of the 4 or 5 co-drivers I worked with, I can't remember exactly how many of them, I'd have to count. But basically, the last co-driver I had was an alright guy, but he had some family stuff going on back home, and he couldn't stay out on the truck for very long. So he left the company not long after that to go deal with his family stuff. And after he got off the truck, I kind of said, you know what, I got the opportunity to drive solo for a little while after he got off the truck, and I decided I didn't want to go back to team driving. But basically, the reason I don't team drive, and it's nothing against Covenant, and it's nothing against team driving for other people, but essentially I can't sleep when I'm getting bounced around, so I was always fatigued, and that made it difficult to I don't do well with others when I'm tired. I need my sleep. I appreciate my sleep, and I just was not getting any sleep as a team driver. So I jumped out of that about as quick as I could. It took me about 6 months, and I hopped over to Crete. Had to get another trainer. His name was Pete. He was a good guy. I don't really have any big stories to tell at Crete, but well, I got a couple of small ones, but I don't know if they'll be enough for a full story time. But I was at Crete, I want to say about 8 months or so, and I made a couple of rookie mistakes. I topped a trailer, not terribly. It wasn't one of those that you see on the news where the guy goes under a bridge and just rips the top of his trailer off, messes up the whole bridge, and does all that stuff. It wasn't like that. I just kind of went under a low bridge that was just a tiny bit too low. But the reason I left Crete was because I got a ticket for something stupid, and that was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. That, combined with those earlier rookie mistakes, it was just more than they were willing to continue paying me for, and so they didn't. And that caused me to rethink things dramatically. And for a little while, I wasn't sure I wanted to continue on being a truck driver. I knew I wanted to continue trying to build a business in trucking. Let me step back a little ways. My original plan for trucking was that I was going to get my CDL. I was going to drive as a company driver for 2 or 3 years, get my chops, learn the business, and basically learn it on somebody else's dime. Because really, that's the best way to learn a new skill, when somebody else is paying you to do it. I've tried to learn new skills on my own dime and failed spectacularly. I've learned that lesson multiple times, and so really that's the only time I think that it's appropriate to work a W-2 job, is when somebody else is paying you to learn something completely new. Once you've learned a job, there is no sense in continuing to work W-2. At least not for me. I mean, there's plenty of people out there working W-2 that just want to be workers, and they're content to be workers the rest of their life. I am not. So the plan is that I would work for somebody else for 2 or 3 years, learn the business, learn everything I could learn about trucking, and then I would buy a truck of my own and become an owner-operator, and eventually get my authority, and eventually build a fleet. Because you're never going to get rich as a single truck owner-operator. As a single truck owner-operator, you're basically tied to that truck, and you got to keep the wheels turning to pay for it. You've got insurance, you've got fuel costs. I mean, let's just leave out the variable costs like fuel and paying for a driver and tolls and things like that. You still got insurance on it. You got to make the truck payments. You got registration. You got IFTA. Well, IFTA is more of a variable, but there's other taxes. Simply put, until the truck is paid for, you can't afford to let it sit. And even once it's paid for, if you want to keep it insured and registered and all that, you still got some costs associated with it. So with one truck, you got to keep the wheels turning. And pretty much, you got to be the one behind the wheel. But you can scale that up fairly easy. Get a second, hire a driver, get a second truck, hire another driver, get a third truck, hire another driver, etc., etc. You get my picture. And even if you're only making maybe $1,000 a week on each truck in profits, you get big enough, you could be making $5, $10, $100,000 a month in profits. That's the way you get rich. Now, obviously, scaling up that fast is risky, and that's not something that I wanted to do, but I did want to get into my first truck at about 3 years and have 5 to 10 trucks after, by the time I was at 10 years in the industry. And that's still my goal. I think I've adjusted the goals slightly simply because I'm less inclined to be butt and seat and a little more inclined to be off the road and doing other things. I've missed my friends in Panama. I've missed that life, and the situation has changed, and I can now go back there and be back there comfortably. But COVID happened. That kept me out on the road. All kinds of stuff has happened that's led to me basically being up here still. But at the end of the day, when I lost my job at Crete, I had to completely reevaluate things. I was not sure that I wanted to continue being a trucker. I didn't hurt anybody, but it made me think that maybe I was not ready to be a safe operator. And that maybe being behind the wheel wasn't for me. I got a little bit of self-doubt. But I still had the idea of starting a trucking company. So I took some time off driving and went into independent dispatching. And I did that, and I got a couple of customers, and I was running a couple of trucks just about the time that the freight market went into complete shitter. And the rates started to plummet. And we all know about that. There's no reason that I need to go into detail about the rates going in shitter. We all know. Every one of us has felt it in one way or another. So one of the 2 trucks that I was running, or that I was dispatching for, she was part of it was a family business. They had 2 trucks. One of them was a flatbedder, that was her son, and the other one was a dry van. And, she had a big, heavy truck, so she could only take loads up to about 40,000 pounds. Her truck was not well suited to dry van over the road, and that's the kind of freight that she was running and that I was dispatching her on. But her son, who was doing heavy haul with the other truck, was doing quite well. Now, he was getting dispatched by somebody else that knows that business. I don't know that business. I know driving. I can do a little bit of reefer. I can do reefer too, but I know driving. So he was running heavy haul, but his truck broke down in a big way. And it was going to be a while before it got fixed. So she gave him her truck, and to be honest, her truck was better suited to heavy haul anyways. And so we just kind of agreed to let that go. And so she stopped driving. I stopped dispatching for her, and she stopped driving. Um, my other customer, my first customer, he had issues going on back at home that meant he could only be out a week at a time and then had to take a week off. That ain't no way to make money as an owner-operator doing OTR, and he was power only. That's a hard way to make money. And it wasn't really a good way for me to make money because I'm paid a percentage of his loads. So best case, I'm making a couple of $100 the weeks that he's out, and then not making the money the weeks that he's not. So, and it wasn't looking good as far as the freight market in general. It was just getting worse and worse and worse. He's looking for ways to save money. So we just kind of agreed that the best way for him to save money would be to self-dispatch, and I decided I'd just go back out on the road. I found a local company. They only have 15 trucks, but they were 5 minutes away from my house, their yard, and I could work with them through my LLC that I had set up for the dispatcher. I don't have to be an employee driver, but I can still be a company driver. Work basically for somebody else on their dime, eliminate all the risks. So I went back to work as a driver, and I went to work for them. And 3 or 4 months later, I said, okay, I've saved up a fair amount of money. I'm going to try and buy a truck. So I came off the road. I came off the road because I had gotten to the point where I was certain that I had a truck picked out. I had financing lined up. I had everything ready. I even was basically planning on just coming off the road, getting my truck, getting right back on the road with the same company, but in my own truck. Well, so I came off the road, and then the financing fell through. Problem with my credit. This is probably because I lived in Panama for nearly 20 years, didn't spend any money up here, didn't have any credit cards up here, didn't have any property up here, didn't have any loans up here. Basically, I was rebuilding my credit from scratch when I came back up here in 2019. And I hadn't rebuilt it all the way. So something fell through, and I didn't get the loan, and I didn't get the truck. So I said, damn it. Well, now I got a pile of cash. I don't got a truck. And I took a little bit of time off, went back down to Panama, went to Colombia for a little while, enjoyed myself there immensely, and then came back up and went back out on the road with the same company. Worked for them for another 3, 4, 5 months. I don't remember how long exactly it was. And I said, okay, it's time to try this whole getting a truck thing again. But instead of trying to buy a truck with my shaky credit, I'm going to go lease purchase. I wanted the goal. Now keep in mind, my long-term goal is to get my own authority and start my own trucking company. And if you're going to do that, you need to know something about taking percentages of loads and booking your own loads, and all the various costs that you need to pay on your truck. You have to, tolls, fuel, all that stuff. I needed to learn all those lessons, and I hadn't. As a company driver, you're not going to learn all those lessons. You don't know what the expenses are of operating a truck when you're a company driver, and that's just taken care of for you. So I looked around at lease purchase companies, looking for what companies treat you as a true. Basically, I was looking for a company where I would essentially be a independent carrier, but operating with somebody else's authority. Basically, where all the costs were passed on to me, so I knew exactly what the costs of owning and of having my own authority would be like. There are a small handful of companies that'll do that, that are lease purchase, that have a lease purchase program with a walk-away lease. One of those is Super Ego. I said, okay, and I started doing my research on Super Ego, and I was like, well, this company does not have the best reviews out there. They look a little bit sketchy. But they are effectively what I'm looking for. They are extremely hands-off. They pass all the costs down to you. Cost of the truck note. You have to rent your trailer from them, or you can do a lease purchase on a trailer as well if you want. They don't give you any fuel discounts, but you can use your own fuel cards and work around that and get your own discounts outside of them. Basically, they were exactly what I was looking for. A company that is extremely hands-off, that all they do is take their cut and dispatch the loads. And that's the important thing to note there, is that they dispatch for you. And they don't allow you to self-book your loads. You have to use their dispatchers. And that is one of the key reasons I was not successful at Super Ego. I was spectacularly not successful at Super Ego. I did a pretty good job as far as making enough money to pay for the truck, fuel. I tried to be selective of the loads so that I was getting good loads and going to good places, but I was simply not prepared, and I was not able to make it work at Super Ego because of the fact that I could not select my own loads. I could refuse loads. If my dispatcher came to me and he gave me a load that just was not profitable, I could say, no, find me a better one. Well, I kept doing that, and it would get to the point where he couldn't find good loads. I mean, keep in mind, the freight market was shitty, so I can't put all the blame on him. But he would find I would go on the DAT boards. Now, I couldn't book the loads, I couldn't call brokers, I couldn't do any of that, but I would go on I could go on the DAT board and say, hey, I'm here, I want to go wherever, and start looking for loads that paid enough that I could actually make some money. And every time I'd do that, and I'd say, hey, let's go to, we're in Atlanta, let's go to Tennessee, or let's go to New York, or let's go to wherever. He'd say, oh, okay, I see that load, but we can't work with that broker. And that's one of the real problems with Super Ego, is if they have had any bad experiences with a broker, they will not work again with that broker. And they have had bad experiences with a lot of brokers because they're kind of a shady company. I'd be willing to bet those brokers had a bad experience with Super Ego, and it just didn't go well for either one of them. So, but that's just speculating. I can't say for certain that was what was happening there. But short end of the story is, I could not get good loads. I could not get profitable loads through Super Ego. Now, all of y'all that have driven for Super Ego, you'll say, and it's true, the secret to success with Super Ego is getting a good dispatcher. If you can find a good dispatcher, that can get you good loads, that can get you profitable loads, you can be successful. And I'm certain that that is the case. I did not have a good dispatcher, and I didn't have enough of a cushion built up that I could afford to go several months making no income, basically, making just enough to pay for the truck. I couldn't drag that out. So I couldn't afford to take the chance. I mean, I could have easily said, you know what, find me a new dispatcher. I want to try with somebody else. I could have done that. I did not do that because I couldn't take the chance that I'd have an even worse dispatcher in the next try. Or even a dispatcher that was no better. I had to start making some money, or I had to get out of there, and I just decided to get out of there. There's some other reasons, and I will probably make a whole video just about Super Ego, because there is a whole story to be told about all the reasons I left Super Ego, and the fact that I couldn't make money was just one of them. But I got the hell off of that truck. Fortunately, it's a walk-away lease, so I really wasn't taking any real risk except for that I wouldn't make money. And I didn't make money, and I got off the truck, and that was the end of that story. I decided, well, I still want to lease a truck. I still want to work for another carrier, but maybe rather than jumping into the deep end and being sink or swim, maybe I'll try a different company and a different approach and find a lease purchase that pays by the mile and is essentially, you know, being a company driver, but on a truck that I'm leasing from the company. Less stress, might be a good path to get in a truck, good path to build a fleet, etc., etc. And maybe I can build a fleet within that carrier and go from there. So I looked around and I chose rail. Now I don't have anything bad to say about rail. It's not like Super Ego. I've got bad stuff to say about Super Ego that I will save for a future video. But for rail, they're a good company. The pay's not great and one of the things with the lease purchase program, they make you drive as a company driver, a W-2 company driver, 3 months before they'll let you lease a truck from them, which is fair. They want to make sure that you're going to be a good driver, and you want to make sure they're going to be a good company. Totally square, totally acceptable. You know, so I went to the orientation, and they've got an interesting pay structure, and it applies to both company drivers and owner-operators, in that the shorter the load, the more they pay. And so it makes it a little bit difficult to calculate how much you're going to make in a week. Because some weeks you'll be doing a lot of short runs, which means you're sitting at shippers and receivers a lot, or wasting a lot of time. I mean, they do a lot of dropping hooks, but they also do a lot of live loads. So it's a mix. But so you're going to waste a lot of time on the short runs at shippers and receivers, either swapping trailers out or getting loaded. And you might do 2, maybe 3 loads in a single day because of the fact that they run some short runs. Now they pay really good, better than $1 a mile to a company driver for the shorter runs. But unfortunately, the way it adds up, you're not going to make a whole lot of money at rail as a company driver. During orientation, when the trainer asked everybody how long they'd been driving, and I spoke up and said, well, I've been driving for about 2.5 years. And he said, well, how much are you used to making? And I told him. He said, well, you're not going to make that here. And he was right. I never made anything close to what I'm making right now, or what I was making at the company before that I was working with before going to Super Ego. He said, you're not going to make that here. He was right. And he quoted a number of like $800 a week take home after taxes. And I was like, woohoo, ouch. That's not good. And that's as an experienced driver. You know, the new drivers make less. But I said, well, you know what? I'm only going to be a company driver for 3 months. I could take it up the poop chute. I could take it up the poop chute for 3 months, because the math I had done on the lease purchase looked like it would still pay pretty good once I got the lease purchase truck. You know, their lease purchase, the payment plan is based off of how many miles you drive. It's not a fixed monthly payment. So if I wasn't making a whole lot of money, or wasn't making a whole lot of miles, and they do some short runs, I wouldn't have that big of a truck payment. So my fixed costs were pretty low, and I knew I could make that. Or at least I thought I could make that. I don't know. At the end of the day, I left before getting the lease truck. And I'll talk a little bit about why in just a moment. But essentially, at the end of the day, I decided, all right, he's telling me I'm only going to make $800 a month. Worst case scenario, if I only make $800 a month, or sorry, $800 a week, I can survive off of that for 3 months. And so I didn't see that as a stumbling block. Now, as it turns out, I made way more than that. It's entirely possible to make more than $800 a week as an experienced driver at rate. I busted my butt. I drove as many miles as I could. I drove them as fast as I could now. Their trucks are governed pretty slow. So, you know, you're only going to make so many miles in one of their trucks. And the fact that they run a lot of shorter runs means you're not going to be driving those all that much. But anyways, I busted butt, and I was making $1,100, $1,200 in a week, and which is way more than I was told that I was going to make. So I was happy about that. Still, it's not a whole lot of money. It's terrible for take-home money. But again, you know, I was just biding time, putting in my time, learning the company, learning how they do things before I leased a truck from them. But I made a couple calls to the lease purchase guy and asked a couple of questions that I should have asked up front, but it just didn't occur to me to ask up front for some reason. And I found out that in order to do a lease purchase from them, you cannot hire a driver to operate your truck for you. Once you buy the truck, or once you lease the truck, you've got to drive that truck until it's paid for. And you're the only person that can drive that truck until it's paid for. And it's a lease term of 5 years. And you can't pay it off early. These were things that I should have asked up front and didn't. My mistake. Won't happen again. That's not really what I have in mind for my goal of building a fleet. I do not want to be button seat for 5 years. I want to get a truck, find a driver for it, or drive it until I find a driver for it, take a little bit of time off, then get another truck, drive it till I find a driver for it, take a little time off, get a third truck, etc., etc. You see, you kind of see where I'm going with that. Can't do that at rail. You can't find, if you lease a truck from rail, you've got to drive the truck. You can build a fleet at rail of trucks that you have paid for. If you are there for 5 years and you pay off your truck, well, then you can hire a driver and put them on that truck, and then you can start the cycle over again and get another truck, drive it for 5 years until it's paid off, find a driver for it, and repeat that cycle. But that really drags it all out. And of course, I could buy a truck from outside of rail and lease onto rail. That's also an option, and that might be something that I reevaluate later down the road once I get a truck. But essentially, leasing my truck from rail was no longer an option at that point. And so I very quickly said, you know what? I'm not going to lease a truck from rail. I'm not going to spend 5 years butt and seat behind the wheel of a rail truck. It just ain't going to happen. So I sent them in a notice. I sent them in my 2 weeks. They had me home within the week. And so I took the holidays off, and I just decided, you know what? I want to spend some time down in Panama. But I've got some family issues up here that are preventing me from going down right now. I mean, it's not like before where I just couldn't go back. I could go down if I wanted to for a week, 2 to 3 weeks, whatever, as long as. But I can't go down for what I want, for the amount of time that I want to go down. And because I lost so much money while I was working at Super Ego, and I didn't make that money back working at rail, I just decided, you know, it would be better for me to go back on the road now and then take some time off later down the road. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm back at the company that I have worked at now 3 times. They pay good. They pay me through my LLC. They treat me right. The equipment is not the best, but it is good equipment. And this is where I can see myself for at least the next 5 months, most likely for longer than that, because I think what I'm going to start doing is driving, get myself into a cycle where I drive for 3 months, and then I go spend 3 months in Panama, and then I come back up here and drive for 3 months, and then go back down there for 3 months, etc., etc. I could potentially drag that out, do that for indefinitely if I had to. Now, once I build up enough of a savings, maybe I'll turn that into trying again to buy a truck or lease a truck from a not a lease purchaser, but just a straight lease. Well, that remains to be seen, but that's where I'm at. And that's kind of what my plan is. That's how I got into trucking. And I think that pretty much wraps up our story. I don't know how interesting that story will be to y'all. I know everybody's got a different come to trucking story. A lot of y'all that are out there, are just multi-generational truckers and just were behind the wheel by the time you were 6 years old, things like that. That isn't my story. Nobody in my family that I know of has ever been a trucker before. I'm the first one of any of my friends. Now, I've had a couple of friends that have had family members that were truck drivers, but that's about the closest that I've ever been to being in a trucking family. So, I come from the outside, I come from IT, I am a nomad. I have no roots. I have nothing to tie me down. And that's why I enjoy trucking. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm looking forward to building a business that is not related to crypto or technology, which is where my history's from. And trucking's not a bad business to be in. It's a bad business to be in right now, but it's not a bad business to be in. So I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see where this thing goes over the next several years. Who knows? Maybe this channel will take off, and I'll decide it's a good thing to be driving button seat because I can make videos. Or maybe I make videos about running a trucking company. We'll see. I don't really know. I don't know where that's going to go. But that's how I like to live my life. The universe provides everything that I need when I need it. And so we shall see what the universe provides. If you liked this video, and I know I rambled a little bit more than I know I rambled a bit. But and these story times, I'll probably release one of these stories maybe once a week. If you liked this video, make sure to like and subscribe it. Leave a comment down below. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. I really do appreciate your feedback. And I'll see you out there. Thanks for watching.